I'm Susan Swain, host of C-SPAN's Q&A, where we spend an hour with nonfiction writers and historians who add context to today's news. On this episode, we speak with Peggy Wallace Kennedy, daughter of the late Alabama Governor George C. Wallace. During his 1968 and 72 presidential campaigns, Governor Wallace was a leading promoter of segregation. His daughter talks about dealing with her family legacy in her new book, The Broken Road, George Wallace and a Daughter's Journey to Reconciliation.
Today, I have stood where once Jefferson Davis stood and took an oath to my people. It is very appropriate that from this cradle of the Confederacy, this very heart of the great Anglo-Saxon Southland, that today we sound the drum for freedom, as have our generation of forebears before us done time and again down through history. Let us rise to the call of freedom-loving blood that is in us, and send our answer to the tyranny that clanks its chains upon the South. In the name of the greatest people that have ever trod this earth, I draw the line in the dust and toss the gauntlet before the feet of tyranny, and I say segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever.
Peggy Wallace Kennedy, that is one of the most famous clips of your father, four-time Alabama governor, four-time presidential aspirant. You've written a book about your life with him. What are you doing with the book, The Broken Road? What do you want to accomplish?
Well, really, I wrote the book. It's a culmination of the work I've done for the past 11 years, speaking up and speaking out for peace and reconciliation. So the book is really for the legacy that I'm leaving for my two sons. But the theme of the book is really how I came to terms with my past. Not to forget my past, but to accept my past. And leaving a painful past behind is not always easy, but is always right.
Why do you think this book, beyond your family concerns, of course, because you want people other than your family to read it, why this book right now?
Because I hope this book can be a hope for change in our divided America. I hope that it will give people a chance to see that they can live a life where they can overcome their painful past also, and that they can live an inspirational life and inspire others too.
Where did you get the title, The Broken Road?
The Broken Road is actually a physical place. When we were young, and things, especially after the 58 governor's race, things did not go so well after my father lost that race, and my mother took us to the Broken Road, and she would drive from Clayton to through Tuscaloosa and over the bridge over the Black Warrior River, and she would say, "Look for the Broken Road," and it was an abandoned roadbed on the side of the road, and it was asphalt that was heaved up, and it was covered with kudzu vines and shrub trees, and we thought it looked broken, so we named it the Broken Road, and it was very close to my grandparents' house, so Mother would say, "Look for the Broken Road," and we would, and then she would turn down, and we knew that when we saw the Broken Road that it meant unconditional love and kindness and no secrets and no angry voices. And she'd turn down that road, and I'd look for the house with the flowers on the porch. And when I saw it, I'd roll down my window and wave, and happiness would wave me back. And we were at my grandparents' house.
So the Broken Road is actually a positive for you because it led you to a safe place.
Yes, and I wish everyone could have a broken road in their life.
The subtitle of your book is A Daughter's Journey to Reconciliation. You mentioned you've been working on this for the past 11 years. What got you started?
Well, back in 1996, we took our youngest son, Burns, who was 9 at the time, to the Martin Luther King Museum historical site in Atlanta. And we went to his church and to his grave, and then we went over to the museum, and it was being newly constructed at that time. And we were going through the exhibits, and we came to the exhibit, Alabama exhibit, and it showed the Edmund Pettus Bridge, the bombed-out 16th Street Baptist Church, fire hoses and dogs in Birmingham, and George Wallace standing in the schoolhouse door. And Burns looked up at me and he said, he was so sad. Why did Pawpaw do those things to other people? And it broke my heart. And I said, Pawpaw never told me why he did those things to other people. But I know he was wrong, so maybe it will just have to be up to you and me to help make things right. And that was in 1996. So from 1996 to 2009, I raised my children. I supported my husband in his political career. And then I got invited to walk with John Lewis over the Edmund Pettus Bridge in 2009. To walk with John Lewis over the Edmund Pettus Bridge was one of the greatest honors and privileges of my life. But John did something else for me. He showed me that unconditional love, reconciliation, and forgiveness can heal a human heart. But he also gave me the courage to find my own voice. Because when we were small or growing up in a political family, you didn't really have a voice because, or an opinion. Nobody never asked for opinion. And I knew I wanted to do something with that voice. So I decided that I wanted to speak up and speak out about peace and reconciliation. So I thought back about Burns's question. And I thought maybe this would be a way that I could help in some way. So for the last 11 years or so, that's what my husband and I have been doing, is traveling all across the country talking about peace and reconciliation.
As you make your travels, what are your observations about the state of race relations in the country?
Well, I think that we've come a long way. But I think that I think things are slipping back. I think that America is somewhat divided. I think America's hurting right now. America is strong. I think there's hope for America. But if people could see other people with their hearts rather than their minds, that would teach a lot of lessons of unconditional love. I think Dr. King's teachings are needed now more than ever in our world, especially in the United States. John Lewis says we're one family. We're one America. America's about all of us, not just some of us. So I think we're somewhat divided, and we can't go back. We have to keep moving forward. But I think that it's not as good as it should be.
Clearly, they walk with John Lewis across the bridge is so important to you because you both opened the book with it,
yes,
and you closed the book with it.
Yes.
We found a piece of video from 1968 of your father on CBS News talking about his interpretation of what happened that day. Let's watch, and we'll come back.
I am not the chief aider and abettor to the breakdown of law and order or civil rights programs, anything of that sort. In fact, in Alabama, contrary to what you might know, we didn't have any breakdown of law and order in that state. We had some demonstrations.
No breakdown of law and order in Birmingham?
No, sir. What breakdown of law and order came there? We had some demonstrations that put some water on some people and arrested some folks. Did they burn the city down?
What happened after the Selma disturbances?
The Selma march, one woman was shot on the highway by some thugs. People are shot in Washington every day and in Philadelphia every day. But nobody got hurt in the march.
So what is your understanding, after really studying it and even seeing it at the time, of what really happened that day on the bridge?
Those Al Lingo and his posse and Sheriff Clark, they were ready. They came ready to beat those marchers. They wore gas masks. They had tear gas. They had bats that were wired, and they were on horses, and they came to beat those marchers. And so that's what they did. And for my father not to have fired Al Lingo, arrested Sheriff Clark, and fire all those troopers that were on horses that participated was a mistake. It was wrong. He should have done that, and he did not.
Did you ever have an opportunity to challenge him on why he made those decisions?
No, I didn't.
Where were you the day that it happened?
Well, I was 15. My mother and I were at home watching a movie, and they cut in, and they showed the film, and she and I really didn't say much about it. But then a little later, we did talk about the man in the tan trench coat, because he seemed to be the one that had fallen back. And it was John Lewis, because they beat him severely. And we mentioned, she and I mentioned later on about the man in the tan trench coat, not knowing that 50-something years later that I would call him brother and he would call me sister, not knowing.
When was that call to walk across the bridge the first time? Was that the first time you'd met him, or had you met him before?
Yes.
And did he reach out to you?
Yes. I was asked to come to Selma to introduce then Attorney General Eric Holder, because I had been a great supporter of Barack Obama. And I had written an article for CNN, and it was a big hit, I guess you could say. And then so because of that article, they asked me to come, where I come and introduce him. And I had not given a speech since high school, so they put all the speakers in one room, and there was Joseph Lowry and Jesse Jackson, and Eric Holder came in, and John Lewis. And John Lewis came over and sat next to me, and we started a conversation, and we've loved each other ever since.
What is John Lewis's explanation for your father when you've talked about why he approached his own citizens of his state, people of color, the way that he did? Well, how does John Lewis process the way your father handled things?
You know, we've never discussed that.
He doesn't have an assessment of his personality or what drove him along the way?
Well, I think yes. I've read things that John has. He didn't tell me personally, but I've read things that John has said, and John is right, my father created a climate in Alabama with his words and actions that made other people go out and hurt people, and bloodshed and violence. And I've heard I've read many things where John said that.
Your book is really not only your own personal memoir, but it's also the story of your father's political career. And it really falls in three distinct parts: his early years, his path to national prominence, and then the time after his shooting. And
Yes.
I want to spend a little bit of time on each one of those.
Okay.
So let's start with the early years, because you contend that he didn't start out this way. So where was he born, and what were his early influences?
Well, I think he was born in Clio, in Alabama, and his mother and father. His mother was very stoic and very not very loving. His father was a drunk. And died at the age of 40. His biggest influence, my father's biggest influence, was his grandfather, who was a doctor. And he would let my father ride on the back of his horse, and when he would go out into the rural areas and see patients. And I think that was his biggest influence. But his mother was driven in a way that I think that's where my father got his being later on being driven to be governor. She was driven in ways that she when she met my father's father, she was driven. She was going to marry him, and so she did everything she could to get to marry him. So she did, and that's how she was driven, and that went over to my father.
Your father married your mother at a very young age of 16. How did the two meet?
How did they meet? She worked in a drugstore in Northport, and he went in and bought some hair tonic from her. And then he came out, and a friend was waiting outside, and he bet, my father bet him that he could get a date with her. And so he went back. My father went back in and found out her name and got a date with her. So,
is it true that he told her at that very early part of his life that he was going to be Alabama governor one day? Where did his interest in politics come from?
I think from his grandfather, because as his grandfather would go in and take care of the patients, my father would stay outside and talk to the relatives, and he'd go around to each one. He would just talk, and there'd be a crowd of the relatives, and he loved the crowd, and I think that's where he got his interest. And I think he was just he loved that, and he just loved talking to people, and I think that's where it came from.
He had two early positions in state politics. One was as the youngest to that point state legislator, age 27.
Yes.
Elected right after he came back from World War II, and then also as a circuit judge.
Yes.
What characterized his approach to public policy and public service in those days? How would you have described him?
He was very interested in and very concerned about the poor, black or white. He cared about people. He wanted a better life for those who were less fortunate, and that was the way. That was the way he was, and up to the time that he ran for governor in '58.
I think people would be somewhat shocked to read about the conditions that he left your family in as he was pursuing his political career.
Yes.
At this point. What was life like for your mother and your siblings and you?
Well, up until '58, we were very happy, and he was a judge, and things were okay. But after he lost that 58 race, he was very devastated, and he would just he'd be gone for days and days, and there was no paycheck coming in or anything. And Mother took a small job there in Clayton, but it just wasn't enough, and so it was very difficult for her, and she did the best she could, and but there was sometimes that we just did without. But she did the very best she could.
Did you have a sense of as a child of being poor?
No, because my mother just had a way about her that made you feel that you were loved, and she comforted you in such a way that no, you didn't feel that way. Even though you didn't have anything to eat, she still comforted you, and you felt like you had everything. That's just the way she was.
How many brothers and sisters do you have?
I have two sisters. One is deceased, and I have one brother.
And where were you in the lineup?
I was the second.
Well, our next piece of video is from the 1958 governor's race, because you write in the book that that's what changed everything for your father's political career and your family life.
Yes.
Let's watch.
It's a pleasure always to come back to Mobile, Alabama. I feel very close to this great section of the state for many reasons. This is George Jr. coming up here, and this is Peggy, and this is Bobby, my first child, of course, born 13 years ago at Brooklyn Army Air Force Base Hospital here in Mobile, Alabama.
So, do you remember as a child going out campaigning with your father all the time?
No. I don't remember that one, but I've seen that clip many times, and I remember going to Montgomery on the night of the returns in '58. I remember that because I remember the little slippers that my Aunt Bill gave me, and then I remember that he lost, and up to that point. I loved my daddy so much, and I just didn't think he could lose anything, and I was devastated because I couldn't believe that he had lost that. That was my daddy, and he could do anything, but he lost, and I couldn't believe it, and I was very, very upset, and he comforted me.
So some other things to know about that race, because it was so important in changing his future direction. His opponent was John Patterson. And how did Mr. Patterson approach the race, and why is it that your father lost to him?
Well, John Patterson was had the support of the Klan, and Alabama wanted segregation, and so John Patterson ran on that, and he was elected. My father ran on good roads, better schools, but that's not what Alabama wanted. So John Patterson they went in a runoff, and John Patterson pulled that one out.
So what was your father's takeaway lesson from that race?
He would do anything to win next time, and that's what he did. He chose power over principle, and he used racism and segregation to win the '62 governor's race.
How long did it take for him to decide he was going to run again in 1962, and what was it like in your family during those years when he was making that decision?
Well, I think he decided the day after he lost that he was running. So he was gone all the time. Things got very, very bad, and as far as family life went. So my mother, in '59, she left him and took us to our grandparents, and she filed for divorce, and when she did that, then she realized she held all the cards. and she was the strong one. So eventually he realized that he could not run that race without her. And so he came and got her, and they reconciled. But he did run by using racism and segregation, because that's still what Alabama wanted, and promised that he would stand in the schoolhouse door to block any African American that wanted to go to school.
So that moment for your mother seems like a real moment of empowerment for her.
Yes.
That she said, he needs me, and then she would hold the cards. How did you have a sense of her really changing at that point?
You could feel it, and you could see it. And then she just was a very strong person after that. And it became equal. She said, we're equal now, so, and he agreed. So she said, you're not going to ignore me anymore, that kind of thing. So it was, she'd been strong all along, but I think having to decide to go to the broken road, take us and leave, was really the best thing she could have done. And for him to realize that she had left him with the children, and that there's no way he could have run for governor with being divorced and having children, running around, wondering where their daddy was. And she knew that she held all the cards. And when he came, like I said, when he came and got us, he knew it too.
How did your family's life change, going from a place where you were really almost impoverished to living in the governor's mansion?
Well, it was like a fairy tale, and it was wonderful. And I remember my mother saying, "You can have anything you want to eat." And I don't know if that was her way of apologizing, or for all those days in Clayton, or if that was just, I think it was her way of apologizing. But it was a wonderful time, and she was a wonderful First Lady, and we all just it was wonderful.
Your father was sworn in January of 1963, and 1963 gets an entire chapter in your book because it seems like history accelerated, a year of one momentous event after the other. It was also the time when your father went national on June 11th with the standoff in the State University door. We have some video from that time we're going to watch.
Now, therefore, I, George C. Wallace, as governor of the state of Alabama, have by my action raised issues between the central government and the sovereign state of Alabama, which said issues should be adjudicated in the manner prescribed by the Constitution of the United States, and now being mindful of my duties and responsibilities under the Constitution of the United States, the Constitution of the state of Alabama, and seeking to preserve and maintain the peace and dignity of this state and the individual freedoms of the citizens thereof, do hereby denounce and forbid this illegal and unwarranted action by the central government.
I take it from that statement that you are going to stand in that door and that you are not going to carry out the orders of this court, and that you are going to resist us from doing so. Is that correct?
I stand upon the statement.
Ms. Kennedy, people might be surprised to read in your book that you discovered that both sides, the Kennedy administration and your father's administration, orchestrated the outcome there.
Well, they worked out, my father did not want any violence or anything to go on. And so I think that they worked out a plan where he could stand in the schoolhouse door and then he would federalize the National Guard, and then the general will come up and say, you have to move. I order you to move, and that was the plan. Because I think they were concerned, well, if we arrest him, do we pick him up, physically pick him up? I mean, there was just a lot that they had to consider, And Carrie Kennedy and I are very good friends today, and I admire her father so much, and so we've often talked about that. And it was my father got to do what he wanted to do. And Vivian and James got to register. And then my father did put security on campus for both of them.
The outcome that the Kennedys probably wouldn't have wanted is what happened, though, but he made his debut on the national stage,
yes.
And it really incited his ambition.
Yes.
So it wasn't that after the Kennedy assassination later that year, he made his first bid for president, 1964. Yes. But he had a problem back at home because he was term limited, and you said that's when he came up with the audacious plan for your mother to succeed him. How much did she want to do this?
Well, my mother wanted to run, and she called each one of us children in one at a time and asked our opinion. And I did not want her to run, but she said, Peggy, I want to do this. This is something I want to do. And so it wasn't until years later that I found out that she had cancer.
Did she know?
When she announced.
Did she know she had cancer?
She knew, yes.
And she had enormous success, 54% of the Democratic vote in the primary with 10 candidates, and overwhelming success, of course, in the election. Was she popular with voters, or was it a proxy vote for your father?
She was very popular with the voters, very popular on her own. She, when they would campaign, they would go out. She would speak a few minutes, offer some cards, and then Daddy would be the main attraction. Well, as the campaign progressed, my mother would speak a little bit longer. She built that confidence up, and then she became the main attraction, and then got to where Daddy didn't speak at all, really. So she became very popular with all Alabamians because she was just so genuine and personable.
So while she was serving, your father made his first serious bid in 1968 for the presidency, running under the rubric of the American Independence Party. What did they stand for?
Well, I'm not sure. I know that he...
his message was stand up for America. Which,
yes.
So what was he talking about on the campaign trail at that time?
Well, I think he was talking to your white, middle-class person who really felt like they didn't have a dream of any kind. And here was a candidate that said, I can give you that dream back. I'm going to stand up for America. But then there were no solutions given, Stand up for America was really kind of a coded message, really. So, but now he was, in 68, he was able to get on ballot in every state.
Which is, people should know that's a very difficult challenge.
Very difficult to do, and he had a great organization that worked day and night, and he got on the ballot in every state.
So in May of that year, not too long after he started, your mother, Governor Lurleen Wallace, passed away, age 41, of cancer. Yes. What was her legacy as governor?
she is probably be the most beloved woman ever in Alabama.
And you were just 18 at the time that she passed.
Yes.
A bit of a difficult question, but what is her legacy to you?
Wow. Everything that I am, that I have instilled in my children, compassion, personal, well, everything she was is my legacy. It's her legacy to me. And I have instilled that in my children. I don't know how to explain it, because she lived only till she was 41. I just turned 18. But she taught me so much in that little span of time. That's the only way I know how to explain it.
Your father went back on the campaign trail, and I just want to tell people how the 1968 election turned out for him. He won 5 southern states, 13% of the popular vote, 40 electoral college votes. You said that he never had any illusions about winning the race. What was his goal?
He just liked to run. He just liked to. He liked the people. He'd gotten on the ballot on every state, and I think he just wanted to see what he could do, and that's what he did, and I think he was pleased with that.
He already had his sights set on running again in 1972, but first he had to be reelected governor in the state, and you tell a story of the Nixon administration's involvement in that race. Can you tell me that story?
Well, I think that some money changed hands from the Brewer people, from the Nixon people, to his opponent, Brewer people, and so that was pretty much the gist of it.
So you tell a story of cash payments going to the Brewer campaign, and then there was also an IRS investigation started against your father.
Yes, against my Uncle Gerald. And so I think maybe things were worked out in the end, and the IRS investigation was dropped. And
your father decided not to run as an independent. But instead run as a Democrat. So you're suggesting there might have been a deal there?
I think so, yes. I think so, yes.
And by 1972, when he went on the campaign trail, were you campaigning with him at that point?
No, I was not. I was.
What was his style like in 1972?
Well, he had a new wife, and we loved her, Cornelia. So she had him all, all stylish and everything. He was very serious about that 72 race, and he was very popular, and was going to win a lot of states, and unfortunately, I think he was shot on a Monday, and the next day on a Tuesday, I think he won Michigan, and I'm not sure, 3 or 4 states that next day.
Yeah, in fact, before that, he had already won every county in the Florida primary. And then there was that day in May 15th, 1972 in Laurel, Maryland, just up the road from where we're speaking right now. We have some video from that from PBS's American Experience back in 2000. We're going to watch and then come back.
It was a very calm crowd, a very nice, congenial crowd. Everything just seemed really nice. So he came down and he started shaking hands.
The Secret Service agent in charge asked Wallace not to go into the crowd. "That's all right," Wallace said. "I'll take the responsibility."
And then all of a sudden I heard, dot, 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 dot. And then time just stood still. I thought they'd shoot him again, and so I jumped on top of him, trying to cover up his head and his heart and his vital organs, his lungs. And there just wasn't anybody around him.
Although you lived through that experience, and I know you've seen that many times, what's it like to watch that?
It's very difficult to watch. It's very difficult, yes.
So the next day, he not only won those 2 primaries, but he found out that he was going to be paralyzed for the rest of his life. So what happened in the immediate aftermath? How did he begin to put his life back together?
Well, it was very difficult. They wanted him to come to the convention, speak at the convention in Miami. So once he was well enough to do that, we went there, and then he went straight to from there to Spain rehab in Birmingham. We stayed there, and then we went home. And it was just very, very difficult for Cornelia. It was difficult for me. My daddy and I were very, very close. We loved each other very much. And it was just very difficult.
Did most people in the political world assume that this would be the end of his career?
I'm sure they did, yes.
And yet he had 2 more terms as governor and another presidential run.
Yes.
Where did he get that from, the fortitude to keep going?
It was just built in for him. And then I think he had a lot of supporters and a lot of people that said, you can do this, whether you're paralyzed or not.
In 1974, he won his next election as governor of Alabama by the largest percentage that he had had in his political career. What do you think the people of Alabama were saying to him, and also how able was he to govern at that point?
I think they were saying, we love you still, and we know that you can do what you've always done for Alabama. And that's to make Alabama better, like you've always done. And we have faith in you. And I think that was good for him.
But he was in persistent pain by this point. And,
yes.
And what about drugs and alcohol? Were they part of his life?
Yes, the drugs. He was became addicted to the painkillers. And so he had to be weaned off that. So that was very, very difficult to watch.
In 1976, despite the pain, he thought about running for president again, made a bit of an early bid. An interesting, just small note in that chapter is that Jimmy Carter, who was seeking the nomination, wanted an endorsement from your father. Does that surprise you, what you know about Jimmy Carter?
No, it didn't. Mm-mm. No.
And he won that endorsement. Your father endorsed Jimmy Carter. Mm-hmm. At that point, after the 1978 election, he was term limited once more, and his 3rd marriage was coming to an end. You write that this is where you think his heart really began to change. What was happening?
I think that I think his change started when he got shot, and then it slowly just started changing, and he was just in his heart. I knew him well, and I could see it in his eyes. And when Shirley when Congressman Shirley Chisholm came to visit him in the hospital when she came, and Ethel Kennedy also came, I saw something in his eyes that were different, and through the years after that, I could just see a change in him. It was slow, and it was beautiful to watch. His personality was changing, and he was becoming the man that I knew and the father I knew in 1958. And at the last 2 years of his life, he would have Mark and I come over late at night. He wanted to talk, and he would talk about how wrong he was about race and segregation. He did most of the talking, and he'd talk around those points, And Mark was a judge, and he'd been a judge, and so they had a lot in common. And it was just, we were so close, and we loved each other so much. That was his way of having us over time and time again, of his way, and the only way that he was capable of asking for my forgiveness, of the way that he had made my life difficult. And I forgave him because I knew that was the only way he knew how. And I loved him for that. Because my father loved me the very best that he could. He learned how to love from his mother the best that he could. And I never asked for any more than he could give me.
He also reached out to African American leaders and asked them for forgiveness, too. We found a clip in our video library of John Lewis talking about how he forgave your father. Okay. Let's watch.
I saw George Wallace as a brother, a Bull Connor, a Sheriff Clark, and I make to mention in my little book, Walking with the Wind, that when you see someone and look in the eye of a member of the Klan, of someone that is beating you, you have to think that at some point this person was a little child, somebody, a little baby. They didn't come into this world hating and putting people down because of their race or color. And something happened. And we all have to have the power and the capacity to be able to forgive and to understand.
He was reelected in 1982 to his fourth term with a great deal of help from black voters in the state of Alabama. What's the lesson to be drawn from that?
Forgiveness, asking for forgiveness, genuinely asking for forgiveness, admitting that you have caused pain for other people, for the acts that you have done, and you ask for that forgiveness, and you are forgiven.
From a policy perspective, how did he use his last term to right some of his earlier wrongs?
Well, he appointed more African Americans to government jobs in Alabama than any governor ever has or has since, and in his cabinet too.
We have our last piece of video is from your father himself, and this is from 1986, and it is a News 10 special from Mobile that is Wallace, the End of an Era, having him talk about his record. Let's watch.
In 1973, 10 years after fighting the integration of the University of Alabama, he crowned the school's first black homecoming queen,
Congratulations here, you're a mighty pretty queen.
And by 1979, he had come full circle, admitting what some say he knew all along. He was wrong.
I believed it was in the best interest of white and black to be in a segregated school system. But I was wrong, and once we lost the legal battles, I think we all saw we were wrong.
I was wrong. So the truth is that when he was running for office, and then especially when he was running for the presidency, millions of people heard his messaging. How many people do you think heard his admission of his wrong, his being wrong, and that his path to reconciliation? Was that covered as much as his campaign was earlier?
Probably not, but we hope the people that heard him went out and told other people, because he was certainly genuine, and he was telling the truth. It was from his heart.
So if you look at the full arc of George Wallace's life, from his early days to really finding the path to power through racial prejudice, and then coming full circle back to a point of seeking reconciliation, what do you think George Wallace's legacy ought to be in our society?
Well, he'll always be the segregation governor that stood in the schoolhouse door. That will always be. But I would hope that his legacy would be coming full circle, that he had the capacity to change and say that he was wrong, because he was wrong. And he knew it, and he admitted it, and he said it, that he was wrong.
You've been talking about this issue, as you said, for 11 years, but writing a book is a very different kind of process. What did you learn about your father, and what did you learn about yourself by writing the book?
Oh, my goodness. I knew I wanted to leave a legacy different to my two sons than was left for me. I learned that my father and I loved each other so much. Sometimes it was complicated, sometimes it was painful, but that we loved each other very much. And I know that he would be proud of me. I know that for myself, but I know it because John Lewis told me so. And that was nice to hear.
Your husband, Justice Mark Kennedy, partnered with you on this book. You
Yes.
never told us how you two met, by the way. How did you meet?
We met on a blind date.
And how long have you been married?
46 years.
And
Yes.
what was his role in this project?
Well, we just put our thoughts together. I mean, he's lived 46 years of the broken road with me, so he had a lot of ideas and a lot of memories and that kind of thing. So when I started talking about my grandparents, he fell in love with my grandmother. So I wrote about her. He just loved her, and he helped me a lot on difficult times that I had to write. He would help me with those chapters, and sometimes I'd kind of take a break, from chapters. But he was right there with me, and my two sons been very supportive. Very supportive.
One of your two sons came with you for this interview today. How have your sons reacted to this book, its publication, and to your reception as you travel?
Well, of course, the book is dedicated to them, and they've been very excited, and they're very proud of me. And but I'm very proud of them, because if it hadn't been for Burns's question, there would not be a book. And that's why did Papa do those things to other people?
In your mind, what would be the best thing that could come out from this entire book project?
That people would like I said, learn learn to see other people with their hearts rather than their minds. And that would teach them the lessons of unconditional love. We need to believe in ourselves, and we need to believe in our neighbor again. And believe in, we all have causes, we all have dreams, that we all have a history, because we're unique, and that's the fabric of our lives.
Peggy Wallace Kennedy, the book is called The Broken Road, George Wallace and a Daughter's Journey to Reconciliation. Thank you for telling C-SPAN your story.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to C-SPAN's Q&A. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and you'll never miss an episode. And while you're there, please take a minute to rate and review us. You can also send us an email at podcasts@c-span.org with your questions, comments, or ideas. Your feedback is welcome.